Hello, David Hopewell from Gwynedd Archaeological Trust here again. This is the second lecture in a short series of informal lectures looking at the work of the Trust. I've been working on Roman projects over the last quite a long time. This is the second lecture and we're looking at the Roman Fort Environs project, which is where we started off with our studies of Roman Gwynedd. I'm a senior archaeologist at Gwynedd Archaeological Trust. You can find out more at www.heneb.co.uk. In the first lecture we looked at the invasion of North Wales pretty much through the writings of Roman writer Tacitus and looked at a timeline. So this time, from now on, we're going to kind of focus on on Gwynedd Archaeological Trust's projects, so we're starting off with the Roman Fort Environs project. A bit of background: this was a project that was part of our CADU grant-aided programme of work, and it's really classed as a scheduling enhancement project. So we're looking at ways of getting further information about sites of national importance, and seeing if we can increase their protection if necessary. Feel like a bit of a fraud. We're saying that this is the recent work of Gwynedd Archaeological Trust. I was somewhat horrified to realise that we actually started this project 21 years ago in 1999, but kept it going on in little dribs and drabs until quite recently. It's all been published. It's appeared in a couple of places. The initial paper was in Britannia in 2005, Roman Fort Environs in northwest Wales. But one of the other products of our Roman and other people's Roman projects is a book put out by the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historic Monuments of Wales. Historical Monuments of Wales, I should say, called Roman Frontiers in Wales and the Marches. So we're looking at the Roman forts in North Wales that were set up after the invasion of Agricola. The slide shows a map of the forts that we know about and the roads. These are all auxiliary forts. They're bases for auxiliary troops. They're not Roman citizens. They were recruited from the provinces. The exact numbers of troops in the forts are not that easy to determine, but it's probably looking at 500 or 600. But many of these might be deployed on duty away from the base. Most of them initially had turf and timber ramparts and timber buildings, and then some were rebuilt in stone. They're all pretty much built to a standard plan. Now, the reason why we wanted to look at Roman forts is as part of our schedule enhancement programme was the scheduled area, i.e. the protected area around the forts, tended to be a very handy playing card shaped area of protection, and not really looking at what was known outside the fort. And we know from other places in the world, and indeed within the local area, that the fort was really the centre of a wider landscape, there was a lot of things going on in the landscape around the fort that was associated with it. This slide here is an aerial photograph of Canovium in the Conway Valley, I think taken by J.K. St. Joseph from Cambridge. This gives us an idea of a Roman fort sitting in its wider landscape. So we have the fort at the bottom, and to the top we can see a Roman road with little plots alongside it, and possibly some buildings. On the right of the fort we've got a bathhouse, and we can see roads going off in various directions. So this is the kind of thing we might be expecting around all Roman forts in North Wales and beyond, obviously. the ideal thing for looking at these kind of things without digging lots of holes is using geophysical survey. So what we've been using are fluxogate gradiometers, kind of magnetometer. I'm not going to go into the details of how these work. That's what Google's for. We've got through 2 generations of machines while this was project was going on. The latter one is a lot quicker and a lot easier to set up. So, the surveys. The first one, the first site that we looked at was a trial. This was the one that was going to make or break the project, see if it actually came up with some useful information. So this one is at Pennal, which is right down near Machynlleth at the very south of Gwynedd. As you can see from the aerial photograph here, there's not much of a clue as in the landscape as to where the fort is, let alone what's going on around it in the wider landscape. This is Nash Williams's plan of it, so you could actually see in the slide a kink in the hedge, which was one corner of the fort. The farm is actually within the fort itself. So we carried out quite an extensive survey here. So this was myself and John Berman. And we've got, I would say, very instructive, if not somewhat puzzling, set of results. So you can see in the centre of the slide the fort itself, and then you can see another array of ditches outside the fort, which I think are probably probably an earlier phase of fort, though we haven't really got any dating evidence. And then all around it you can see there's things going on. My interpretation plan, it probably helps a bit more here, so we can see the layout of the fort, and to the northeast we can see a road running away from the fort with lots of rectangular buildings alongside it. We can see the same kind of thing to the northwest. Now, an interesting thing to spot on these geophysical surveys are the little dark blobs that we can see alongside the road. Now, these are what we call a thermoremnant feature. So these are usually caused by a hearth. So this would be the hearth within a building. Other things on the survey, to the southwest, we have a bathhouse and I think what is a large courtyard building, which is something called a mansio, which is a kind of official inn, and a little shrine, number 28, right down the bottom there. If we look at this reconstruction drawing of the fort at Pennal, we'll have a look at a few of the major buildings and features of a fort, just very quickly. Principia, it's the main administrative centre of the fort. It has a sort of colonnaded parade ground in the front, a cross hall, and then a row of rooms at the back, including a shrine room. Inevitably, next to that is the praetorium, or the commander's house. This is a courtyard house. They were still making Mediterranean-style buildings, even in sunny North Wales. This central range of buildings in the fort, the other position can often be taken up by several different types of building. It's not always that easy to understand what they are from the geophys. Often you find a granary. Granaries are actually quite easy to spot in the geophysical survey. You also get things like hospitals and workshops and that kind of thing. The main road through the centre of the fort is the Via Principalis, leading to the Porta Principalis on either side, right and left. And then the fort is divided up into 3 ranges. So we've got the central range. In the front we have the Praetentura, which in most cases contains barracks, which is what we're seeing here. These are these long buildings. So this is where all the troops are housed in the fort. And in the Retentura at the back we've got more barracks. So as we saw from the geophys, there's bathhouse, a mansio, official inn, and the thing that we were looking for initially, which is the vicus settlement. Now, a vicus settlement is something that's found outside almost all Roman forts. It's a sort of semi-civilian settlement, and in North Wales this tends to consist of lots of small rectangular buildings, usually made of wood, with their set end on to the roads out of the fort. These functions are all kinds of things. I think initially it's sort of camp followers who came in with the army, and then possibly people from the local community moving in there as over time, and so it's trading, craft working, sort of small industrial stuff, food and drink, and probably houses of ill repute. So this is the kind of the high street outside the fort. At Pennow, we did actually manage to have a look in detail at a bit of the vicus. This is a geophysical survey of the settlement, and you can see in these rectangular buildings quite clearly, particularly the one at the bottom left corner, very clear rectangular building with these blobs that, as I talked about before, which are the hearths within the building. We did a small excavation there which showed up a row of post holes, which is easier to see on a plan. You can see a row of post holes, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which are, so we had a sort of small aisled building there with a hearth in the middle, a hearth very close to the post hole, and so one of the posts holding up the roof, unsurprisingly it looked like the building burnt down. We also uncovered the Roman road, so this is a very typical Roman road with a sort of gravelly, stony surface. So that was a success. It showed that the fort was actually within quite a large area of very important archaeology that needed protecting. So next we moved on to Caerau. This is near Bala. So this was again built in the late AD 70s, we think. This one is much more visible in the landscape. This is an aerial photograph of it. The square field in front of the farmyard is actually the ramparts of the fort. So actually, in this one, getting at and getting a good survey of the fort itself was probably not going to be a major outcome, but you can actually even see the parch mark of the road coming out to the right, and if you look very closely in front of the square field, you can just about make out the outline of some buildings in that field. So this had all been spotted quite over the years, so we could actually see some of these features, and we could see that there was a shrine and a cemetery were discovered at various times. So this is our survey. I did most of this with John Berman, but he carried out some of the high-res stuff in front of the fort and got superb results. What we can see again is that we have a great selection of activity on pretty much all sides of the fort, with the little blobs again in the geophysics showing where the hearths are within the buildings, but we can see buildings and all kinds of things here. We can also see the roads coming out of the fort, and then to the south east of the fort we can see a big anomaly, a very big strong anomaly, which is the result of the burning in the bathhouse. And then beside that we can see a huge courtyard building. So this is what we call, well, as far as we can tell, this is called a mansio. So these are within an annex on the end of on the end of the fort. The mansio, we think, is an official inn, so this had administrative functions and was to do with the Roman postal service and all that kind of stuff. But it's almost a quarter of the size of the fort, so it obviously shows its importance. After we think the forts have been abandoned, we seem to be picking up a bit of Roman pottery that's later than that, and we're wondering if the mansio carries on after the fort has been abandoned, so it's still carrying on administrative duties even though the fort has gone out of use. So here's the this is the interpretation plan. You can see we do seem to have a lot of activity around the fort. The vicus seems mostly to be on the northeast, but there's quite a lot of activity. Not quite sure how to interpret it all on the southwest. If we move on to Bryn y Gyfeiliau, or also known as Caerau Rhufeinig, this is near Capel Curig. This was a slightly later fort, we think. We've got quite a lot of dating evidence from this. We think it was probably built in AD 90 or thereabouts. Again, not a lot to see from the air. The trees in the middle of the field there actually have some Roman remains in them that are still uncovered from excavations way back in the 50s or 60s, I think it was. It was mostly excavated by J.P. Hall in the 1920s, and he picked up the line of the ditches, and it seemed to be a rather curiously square fort with an annex to the west. Our geophysical survey wasn't terribly clear, but it did show us what was going on and why the fort looked a bit peculiar from Hall's trial trenching. This is my interpretation diagram, and it shows that we originally had a big playing card shaped fort, so you can see the ditches at both ends, double ditches, that was subsequently reduced by digging a ditch through the middle. So the Principia, which you would normally find in the middle of the fort, ended up being right at one end of the reduced fort. And we can see other buildings to a certain extent. We can see some barracks and a row of anomalies on the road out of the fort to the east, which we're not entirely sure what they are, but they could be burials. So the reduced bit of the fort, feature number 8, which has been partly excavated. As I mentioned before, that's the bit in the trees. It looks like that part of the fort was used as an annex with other buildings in there, probably more sort of administrative buildings. Canovium, we've already seen a photograph of this one, aerial photograph. This is the another fort from the late AD 70s, but it appears to have been reoccupied to some extent in the 4th century. We've seen this aerial photograph before. It shows there's an awful lot going on outside the fort. Our geophysical survey kind of reiterated this. What we've got to the north of the fort is a huge area of vicus settlement. It's a very dense settlement. Zooming in on it, we're looking at these dark blobs, which I mentioned before, are hearths, or some of them could be pits, but we can see all alongside the road, which runs up through the centre of the slide. There are huge amounts of these dots, which are all hearths, and it looks like we've probably got alongside the road there lots of different phases of vicus buildings. So we've got these wooden buildings set end onto the road. There seem to be quite a lot of them, and they've probably burnt down or fallen down and been rebuilt. So that's why we seem to have all these overlapping things. There do seem to be quite a few other buildings there. Not entirely sure what they all are, but it shows that we've got this big landscape around the fort. It's very important. And very important to the running of the fort, and presumably a lot of archaeology under the ground there. This one appears to have some kind of a ditch around it, so it could be a defended vicus, which is slightly different to the other ones we've seen. Moving on, this is a site that we looked at after the main project, done in conjunction with the National Park, I seem to remember. This is Tomanamere in the uplands near Caerau Rhufeinig, a very sort of remote fort. This is a plan of the wider, what we know about it from before we did the work. So you can see there's all kinds of things. We've got practice camps, a little amphitheatre, burials, a parade ground, a complete water system running into the supplying the fort. We've got roads with barrows and marching camps, and even the abutments of a Roman bridge, one that really is a Roman bridge. Our geophysical survey was a real challenge, but myself and John Berman got through it, and it came out better than I thought it would. We can see barracks on the eastern side of the fort very clearly. Not entirely clear what's going on on the western side of the fort. There seem to be some quite anomalous buildings there, but we don't even know from our geophys whether they're definitely anything to do with the Romans. They might even be to do with the Mott. Difficult to know at the moment just from this, but definitely a lot of archaeology within the fort itself. One interesting new discovery up towards the north, we can see yet again those giveaway thermo-remnant blobs on the geophysical survey. So it looks like we have a vicus along the side of that road running up to the north, kind of north east side of the fort. Quite a lot of activity down towards the bridge as well, but you can see these big smudges of dark and light. This is the effect of the underlying geology. So almost all respects, this was a bit of a challenging geophysical survey. But we can actually see there are buildings down to the southeast as well. That's most of the survey, so we've got a couple more to look at. The latest one that came up, which wasn't really part of the main project, was a fortlet. Now, as we discussed in the first lecture, we haven't really found much on Anglesey itself, but fairly recently, so 1990, Mary Arris took an aerial photograph of an interesting little feature near Kemlyn Bay, and we eventually managed to follow this up. We weren't sure whether it was an Iron Age settlement or what really, but it turned out to be a perfect little Roman fortlet. It came out very clearly on the survey. If we zoom into it, you can actually see the remains of some rectangular buildings inside and a nice gateway on the north side. It's surrounded by a rather wobbly, but definitely there, ditch, which, so on the interpretation survey number 1 there, a bit strange, but there are parallels. This is the Neronian fort at Martinhoe in Devon, and this is almost exactly the same, quite remarkably similar. The outer compound around the fort that seemed to be for beacons, so for signalling. So it looks as though the fort is to do with the Roman fleet and either a lookout or a landing place or a signalling place on the north coast of Anglesey. So a really nice new discovery there, and the first bit of Roman archaeology from the invasion period that we've discovered on Anglesey as far as military archaeology goes. Yes, one more fort. This was at Llanfor near Bala. So this had been spotted by St Joseph on an aerial photograph. There's something going on there. I think this is when he'd been visiting Caerau at the other end of Llyn Tegid, and spotted there was something very interesting going on the valley floor on the other side of Bala. We could see a big polygonal stores compound and a corner of 3 ditches just in the bottom centre of this photograph. Now, I'm not going to go talk about this one now. This is going to be our next lecture, and I'm just going to exclusively look at Llanfor in that one. So that's all we've got time for on this one, folks. See you soon, and we'll look at this fascinating site then.